Right, I think we'll get started. I know that some people are still trying to find their way round, so we'll let them come in and make them take the front seats so we can see them arrive late. But anyway, I'm delighted to welcome you here to this very important topic about volunteering in the civil service. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Jill Ryder. I head something called the Capability Group in the Cabinet Office working for Gus O'Donnell, and that means I do essentially three jobs. I run the capability reviews, I oversee leadership and talent development in civil service, and I'm the head of HR. So in all of those areas, this topic is very, very important to me. It's also important to me personally because I do believe that this is a way in which we can all help improve the communities in which we live and work. So it's very, very important, and I feel very passionately about how, as a good employer, we ought to be very engaged with the agenda. So I'm very pleased to welcome you here to Civil Service Live, and in particular, to welcome you to the launch of this report. We are really especially pleased to have with us today Baroness Neuberger, who's going to actually talk to us about it. And it's actually an extremely important part of our agenda. You'll see from the next slide that the Prime Minister himself has this as one of his key initiatives. He does believe it's a way in which we can translate government policy into the lives of everybody. And he also believes, as the civil service at the centre of helping government be successful, we should be a role model. And so that's why this report is just so important to us. I'm really very pleased that this report has been developed. I'm going to mention Sophie here. She's looking very seriously at me, so I need to make her relax a bit. Very pleased that this report has been supported by OTS in the Cabinet Office, and in particular Sophie Chapman here. She's smiling now, you'll be pleased to hear. She's not looking quite so tense. It's all right, we're not going to muck it up for you, I promise. And so I'm really pleased that we can talk about it. The Prime Minister is very focused on making sure, as I said, that we are the role models and that we really do deliver this. And as such, I've been taking the lead to help with it from a cross-civil service-wide perspective. And we'll come back to that later. But in the meantime, I'm really delighted to be able to introduce the Baroness. And basically, I'm really delighted, she doesn't know this yet, but delighted because for a long time I've known her voice. I haven't met her before much, but certainly I've known her voice because I don't watch much television, but I am a great Radio 4 fan, and periodically your voice, with its energy and passion, booms into my living room or my kitchen, and occasionally even gently wakes me up with thought for the day, which has always been a great pleasure, so I'm very delighted to have you here in person. It's just one of the many things that she does. She is a rabbi. I think you were the second female rabbi, but the first to have your own synagogue in this country, which is a fantastic achievement in terms of breaking down walls. She was created a Lib Dem peer in 2004 and appointed as the government's volunteering champion in 2007. She's recently stepped down from it, but I'm really pleased that we were able to twist her arm into doing this before she stepped down. So with that, let me hand over to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jill, and that's rather embarrassing. I've actually been moved off Radio 4's Thought for the Day on the whole. Very occasionally I get to do it, but these days they've sent me, I don't know whether they've sent me down market or just older, and I do Radio 2's Pause for Thought with Terry Wogan, which means that you get an older audience but more of them. So I don't know what I'm supposed to think about that. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure what the answer to that is. Listen, I'm delighted to be here. I am now an ex-GOAT, the Government of All the Talents. I finished on June the 3rd on the basis that it was local elections and European elections and would be into a general election campaign And as a Lib Dem peer, I thought it might get a little more difficult than it's been, because it has been a truly wonderful experience. And I do want to pay tribute to all the people I've worked with. And that is the civil servants. And Sophie's there, and she's already blushed once, going to make her blush again. She's been completely amazing, Sophie Chapman, and she's just been promoted, which I think is hugely well deserved, because she's just been extraordinary. And I sort of stood there and said things, and then she's sort of gone out to see everybody and written all the reports, so she's been amazing. But civil servants, generally that I've worked with, have been absolutely fantastic, but so have the ministers. And government ministers are getting a lot of flack, and I don't agree with this government about quite a lot of things. But on this issue, the ministers have been absolutely fantastic, and they have backed it completely. And I think that that's one of the things that has been great. And in fact, this should not be a party political issue. This should be a cross-party issue about how we encourage people to play a role as volunteers in our society. So I'm really pleased to be here for that reason and to pay tribute to the people I've worked with. But the other thing I want to say is I think the civil service is in my blood. My father was a civil servant. My son is a civil servant. My husband was a civil servant till he got fed up and became an academic. I was a civil service commissioner briefly. And I think public service and the civil service is vastly underrated in our society. And I think people, talk in a rather nasty way about bureaucrats. That's not to say that we don't have quite a lot of bureaucracy, but they talk in rather a nasty way about bureaucrats without understanding what civil servants and the civil service itself, the machinery of government, can deliver. So I'm a huge fan, and as I said, I think there's a kind of family commitment to the civil service. Now, let me explain. I was slightly surprised when the Prime Minister asked me to be his volunteering champion. I had met him because before I started doing this, I chaired the completely independent Commission on the Future of Volunteering, and that's relevant to some of the other stuff I want to say. And he called me in to talk to me 2 weeks before he became Prime Minister. And I thought, that's great. He's going to tell me what he's going to do in his first 100 days. He's going to announce the money that we've asked for. This is absolutely fantastic because he'd asked for an early bid. And I thought, great. He's just going to say, you can have the money, and he's going to announce it. I thought, hallelujah, that's just how to run government. Great. No, that's not right. And he asked me to do this. And I have to say, I am rarely silenced. I think actually Joe rather made that point, but I'm rarely silenced. I was completely utterly silenced for about 30 seconds. And the result of, negotiating how this might work in being a different party and sometimes voting against the government, particularly on civil liberties issues, but the result was this idea of a champion for volunteering. And then I'd obviously been foisted on these poor people in the Office for the Third Sector. And we had to work out what in this role I was actually going to do. And we thought about it quite hard, but we came up with it quite quickly, which is to look at specific areas of service. And we started off looking at public service and how people volunteer in the public services. So not looking at the civil service at all at the beginning. And we started off with health and social care on the basis that I'd been Chief Executive of the King's Fund, and in a sense the Department of Health is my home department. And we then went and looked at volunteering in the criminal justice system. So we were looking at members of the public volunteering in a whole variety of different ways across our public services. And then I was going to go. I said, well, okay, I've done my time, that's it. And Campbell Robb, who is head of the Office for the Third Sector, kind of got me and got both my arms behind my back and said, well, we really want to do something about volunteering and the civil service. And we'd talked about it right the way through. We had talked about, if we are talking about volunteering in the public services, shouldn't we also be talking about volunteering by public servants? And what would that look like? And how could you actually gather together what goes on in terms of volunteering? And many, many, many civil servants do volunteer, as do people in the NHS and other aspects of public service. How do we gather that together? But how do we make it central to how the civil service thinks about itself? So instead of saying lots of people do wonderful good things in their own time and lots of departments have employer-supported volunteering schemes, how do we make it much more focused? And that was the challenge I was given. And then, said Campbell, you could write the report without doing any of the work. He said, you know what you want to say already. Not true. And I think one of the important things is what we have discovered in the very, very short time we've had to do this in, because I did want to be out by June the 3rd. but what we have discovered about some of the extraordinary things that are going on across the civil service. And you're going to hear case studies in a few minutes of actually what's going on. But we've only got time for a couple of case studies, and you will get copies of the report when you go out, and it gives you lots more. And there's lots of other things going on that are absolutely inspirational that we couldn't put into the report because we simply didn't have room or time. But that was the thing. I think, although perhaps the broad brush ideas we already knew, I don't think we knew the extraordinary variety of things that were going on right across the civil service. And that is really remarkable, and people ought to be very proud of that. So, what had I said before? Well, I'd said in both the Health and Social Care report and in the criminal justice one that, since there are enormous numbers of public servants involved in both of those areas, they also ought to be volunteering. Hence the move towards we should think about the civil service in terms of volunteering. How do we think about it? Well, why would you want to expand it since there are lots of really great things going on? I think there's something very important, and I think people haven't really bottomed this argument out. There's a business case here. There's a really strong business case for why employer-supported employee volunteering is so valuable and why it applies across the departments of government. And there are three main things that you can point to, but we could give you lots of other bits of example as well. First of all, there is the accusation, some of you may have heard it, that the civil service is a bit ivory towerish, and that all people do really is push bits of paper around and think great thoughts. You may think this is not a reflection on how you spend your lives, but out there, a lot of people think of the civil service as very remote and very far away. And it does seem that both in reputational terms, but also in real terms, about getting out there and finding out what the communities for which the policy is being made or for which the delivery is designed, what they really do and what they really think is very valuable. And so broadly, I suppose we'd say that outreach and the community engagement that happens as a result of it does help government be more responsive. And I think there are some examples, and we're going to hear a bit of some of that today. There are some examples that make that abundantly clear, where civil servants who've been working in an area go out and meet the people for whom, if you like, they've been delivering services, but meet them in a different way because they're volunteering with them. They're on a level with them. They're not the civil servant that's remote. They're actually the same. And that does seem to make a huge difference to relationships and is something we absolutely ought to encourage. So that's one of the strong business case arguments. Secondly, and I think we haven't recognised it enough, volunteering itself does give you lots of practical learning and lots of development. When I was chairing the Commission on the Future of Volunteering, one of the things that came out very strongly from people who were asked, why do you volunteer? And we'd all thought, people would say, I volunteer to make a bit of a difference. Not at all. One reason people volunteer across the piece, not just in the civil service, is to get particular skills and experience, often when they're younger, to put it on their CV. And it's quite clear that volunteering often gives you that, and it gives you an opportunity to do things you would not normally get in your regular working life or any other part of your life. So you do learn things, and you do get development. Now, the civil service is brilliant as a trainer, and Jill and I have talked about this very briefly, but you get enormous opportunities for various forms of training and development in the civil service. Wouldn't it be wonderful if volunteering opportunities were seen as part of the training and development that was regularly on offer in every single department across the civil service? The evidence is clear that you get huge development out of doing it. The evidence is clear that you learn other skills. Sophie had a wonderful moment of saying, particularly some of the fast streamers, she said, through gritted teeth, it gives them some soft skills. So I think there is something there about if you're doing hard-nosed stuff, or you're just doing money, and lots of people in the civil service are doing lots on money, actually, you do need to hone your soft skills. And getting out there and volunteering, and often volunteering with very vulnerable people who are affected by precisely the work you're doing, is a very good way of honing those soft skills. So that there's that bit. It gives you skills, and it does actually, it makes you feel different. And very often it gives you practical skills. And I think that's also quite important. The civil service It does many things wonderfully, but it doesn't necessarily enhance your practical skills. Yes, you may be able to fix the fax machine and the photocopier. Those are kind of sort of essential things, but most people I know in the civil service kick the photocopier, which is not necessarily the most practical way of dealing with it. However, but there are practical skills you can learn from volunteering. And a lot of the civil servants that I know, and certainly my family members, have found that getting practical skills through their volunteering work as civil servants has been enormously valuable. It has also added a bit to their life that they weren't otherwise getting. And two examples I'll give you is, one was of canal restoration. One of my family members did some canal restoration as a volunteer when working in the Department for the Environment, which are very obvious reasons why you might do that, and said that what was really good is that he learnt to be a bricklayer, and that was enormously useful for the rest of his life because his garden wall stopped falling down. I think that's quite important. I know it sounds mad, but it's actually quite important that you use your hands in some volunteering things in a way that you don't on the whole otherwise, because what are you usually doing? You're at a keyboard. It's a very different field. So you get practical things, and you get into the mindset. And I think there is a skill to be got, and it's what I think people call emotional intelligence. And people say you either have it or you don't. Not true. You can hone it, you can sharpen it up, and getting into the mindset of the people for whom you're designing policy or delivering a service is something you can sharpen up, and I think it's hugely important. The last thing I'd say is it clearly boosts morale, and if people are volunteering in groups, it builds teams. It really does give a great sense of it. And so I think it's hugely important, but there's another reason for doing it, which is that if government says people who work within government are volunteering in large numbers, it sets a huge example for other employers around the piece. And, of course, you know, it does bring great benefits to communities as well. And I think it allows you to show different ways of doing things, and it allows you to make it clear that you can use the skills that you've got from the civil service, take them out there, and then use them in a different way. And there's an example that isn't going to be talked about later, which I just want to give you because I think it's such an interesting one. DFID has what it calls the Africa Capacity Building Initiative. And what they do is very senior civil servants in DFID pair with very senior civil servants around Africa. And they share experience and they share skills and they learn things from each other. And I think, you know, at first, I thought, gosh, you know, this is going to be a quite uncomfortable thing. Is this just the Brits telling people how to do things? Actually, not at all. And one of the things that's very interesting from talking to people who are involved in this is that British senior civil servants are learning a lot from very different ways of thinking about things that happen amongst senior civil servants in Africa, where it's actually quite often difficult for government to get a grip on how things work in the population. And I think that that's really interesting because we don't always get it right in this country, curiously. So I think that's a very, very interesting example of a sort of volunteering that will change your mindset that I don't think I would have thought of before we did this work. So what makes it difficult? Quite a lot of things. First of all, I'm absolutely clear that if employee volunteering supported by the employer is going to work properly, it needs buy-in. And it needs buy-in by everybody. It needs buy-in by permanent secretaries. I think we largely have that, I have to say. It needs buy-in by HR. Jill, you've still got quite a lot of kind of what I would describe as a missionary activity to do here. Some HR departments are completely behind it. Some a little less so. How do I put that? It needs corporate teams really taking it and owning it. And it needs line managers. And lots of line managers will say to individuals, yeah, sure, you can have a bit of time off to volunteer, no problem. But the line managers saying that without tying it together with everything else is not as effective as actually saying, let's do this as a group, as a team, as a body of people, as a department. And the report does actually explore some of the reasons and why some of the groups are not necessarily always promoting volunteering. And all of you, I would think, have got a job to do, which is to go back to your department and say, excuse me, could we please do something about it? But the other thing is, which people really haven't taken on board, is this is a huge good news story for the civil service. And the civil service is lousy, forgive me, at blowing its own trumpet. Absolutely useless. And there is something that's fantastic here. You go department to department to department, and something amazing is happening virtually everywhere. It may not be completely coherent, and it may not be spread across the whole department, but it's something, and it's fantastic. And actually, we should be telling that story. And we should be telling the story of how what civil servants do makes a difference to the community, but also makes a difference to the civil servants. And I think that we have not told that story, really, I think, to our very great loss, and to some extent, at our peril. Because when the civil service is unpopular, and when everybody wants to slash money off things, and they just say, oh, well, we'll cut half the civil service away, people need to realise that actually the civil service has a very strong role in local communities, and this is part of it. We need to talk about it, and we need to sell it. I don't mean sort of sell it, actually for cash, but sell it, market the story, and say, look, these are some of the wonderful things that are happening. This is why it makes a difference. So what do we end up recommending? Well, we said that the Cabinet Office volunteering group should continue, well, obviously, and provided with adequate resources. In this climate, that's a little more difficult, but I think that we've got, some acceptance that that is really necessary. Then quite a lot of HR people have said, we don't know how to write a volunteering policy, so we think there should be central guidance on how to write a volunteering policy, how to set up bespoke schemes for departments or for teams, how to do the brokerage that makes that happen, and which outside organisation could easily be approached. And you're going to hear a little bit about that later. We also thought there should be a serious internal promotion campaign across government to show the benefits of volunteering. And this report is just a bit of that. And you going back to your home departments and saying, could we actually talk about this? And could we even at least put it up on our intranet, but actually take it wider, would be part of that. We ought to be using the examples. I've also said that every department should have an employer-supported volunteering scheme in place by the year 2011. I've said that all civil servants should be given up to 5 days off a year in order to volunteer. And that is this employer-supported volunteering, quite separate from what the other volunteering that people do in their own free time. That's no business of the civil service. But what people do in employers' time, people should be given the 5 days off, but it should be taken seriously. And we've also said that for those people who do volunteer, who take advantage of that, then what they do and what they learn from it should be part of the performance review system. So you don't have to volunteer, but if you do, it should be part of how you're appraised. It should be part of what you say to your line manager about what was valuable, but also what the line manager asks you about what was valuable. What did you get out of it? What did you get out of it personally? What did your team get out of it? And lastly, we said that the civil service employee volunteering schemes should actually be promoted by the communications departments, the comms departments across the piece. And we think that that's very important. Now, just before I finish, let me just say one thing about this. One of the reasons there's a bit of resistance, both by HR and to some extent by comms, is that people are very nervous about saying, oh, civil servants are getting 5 days off to volunteer. Shouldn't they just be doing government's work? Isn't this a real waste of public money? Actually, aren't civil servants actually doing their public service anyway? Why should they need to volunteer? How can we explain this? How do we sell this? How do we even say that, you can have the 5 days off? The answer is that the huge benefits it brings to the civil service itself, let alone to the communities which we serve, but the huge benefits it brings to the civil service, the training, the capacity building it does, is enough to justify it. And everybody I have talked to has said that people who are already volunteering, there isn't a sense that because they've got their 5 days off, or in some cases their 3 days off, they're not delivering, they're not doing their bit. Actually, if anything, it brings them back with greater enthusiasm. And I think people have got to say, it's not about wasting time volunteering. It's about, actually, if we volunteer, and in this kind of way, we strengthen our teams, we deliver a really good service, we learn something, and actually, we bring enthusiasm back into our own departments, which is hugely valuable and huge amounts of energy. So with that message, can I just say to all of you, thank you, and all of you, would you go back to your departments and ginger them up, please?
So now to my little list of energy and passion pouring out of the radio, I have to add that in person it's equally energetic, passionate, but also persuasive. There we go. So thank you very much, and once again, thank you for your report. I just want to say a few things about what we are doing at the centre and across the civil service, and then I'm going to hand over to real practitioners to tell you about what two departments are doing, to give you some examples, and then we'll have a bit of time at the end for Q&A. Just in terms of what we've been doing since we sort of raised it up the agenda, there has been always a lot of activity in departments. I mean, exactly as Ibarra said, we've got lots and lots of really good...
Julia.
Can I do that?
Thank you. Much easier.
So much nicer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's much easier. Don't like all this Baroness rubbish.
I'm just looking at the badge. Some people are very sensitive. Very, very, lots and lots of good stories, but for some reason they get hidden. We're sort of very good at hiding our light under a bushel, as my school report once said, and actually we just need to get out there and with pride tell the stories and share the stories and get more and more people involved. So what we've done is we've created a thing called the Civil Service Volunteering Group, where we found as many of the leaders of volunteering strategy as we could in departments. We've brought them all together, and we started off by essentially just sharing stories of the best practices that were out there and what we were doing. And since then, we've created this group of people that meets regularly and has started trying to do things that will actually help us coordinate and develop our strategies. And so far we've done two big pieces of work, and one of them is just to find out what's going on out there. So we designed a questionnaire for departments to essentially run, to just find out where the activity is and what it is that people are doing. And then secondly, we started to produce guidance on how a department could actually develop strategy and policy. And this is one of those areas where things are very different depending on which department you're in, which location you're in, what your people want to do. I am a great believer that this is a really important part of our learning and skills development. And so making sure we're actually connecting the agenda to not only what the business of the department is, but actually making sure it connects to what people need to learn and how they develop themselves is very key. So we've produced some guidance on that. And this network will continue to operate. So again, I encourage you to find out who the people are in your department that are participating and make sure they're really doing that in an energetic way and feeding back to you and helping tell the story, because it is something that's very important and that we need to push. So with that, I'm going to hand over first to Judy. We were talking earlier about how to make the introductions. And of course, you know, I have the brief on Judy and what she's been doing in this space, which actually goes back quite a long way. So she's been involved in this both in the private sector and now in the public sector, HMRC since 2007. Done a lot of diversity as well as corporate social responsibility work. Head of diversity at NatWest Bank, head of diversity and corporate responsibility at Centrica. And she now sits on various of our groups, including the MOD's Diversity Board and various others. But I thought you'd want to know something more personal, so I asked her. Eventually we got to the great story, which is her daughter volunteered as part of the Man United outreach program. And as a consequence, she's now working for them. Isn't that good? So, Judy, with that, over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Jill. And yes, that's a good example, I think, of where volunteering really led to a great opportunity for my daughter Caroline. What I wanted to talk briefly about was sort of the HMRC approach to our community involvement and to talk about the case study that is actually in the report. Starting off more broadly, our community activity is very much part of our overarching corporate responsibility strategy within the department, and we see it as a very important part of this. It's about how we demonstrate that we're a responsible organisation, ensure that we do engender public trust in us, and that we act properly, and get to know what our stakeholders need and what our customers need. So very much a very strong business case for us, and I think leading into how we can improve our services and be more efficient. Our overriding framework that we put together in terms of looking at our community activity is very much looking at activity within areas of deprivation. So giving lots of opportunities throughout the department for very different activities, because our department is very diverse, but with that sort of overarching thread that runs through it. And this whole idea of bringing the outside into the department, so we understand much better what our customers need and what is out there in the community. So we do give all our employees an opportunity to volunteer. We have a volunteering policy, 3 days a year, and also we have a network of volunteer coordinators throughout the department. So we're trying to build up opportunities and build up the opportunity to do this. Our approach to this really spans activities that go under the outreach banner, through to people who are actually volunteering with various organisations in the community, and then through to activities that come under more the public duties piece, so sort of school governors, etc. And we see that as sort of one long continuum in terms of this whole community involvement. And we also have a lot of activity that we do with the Prince's Trust for longer periods of volunteering activity, which we found to be particularly helpful. The other thing that I would just say is that we have established now measures within the department actually linked into our department strategic objectives. So our community activity is very much part of that. So really showing how important it is to us to do this stuff. And also from that feeds directly into the measures that we've got for our Director Generals and their own performance contracts. And so again, it's really emphasising how important it is and making people really concentrate on how do we get out into the community? What makes sense for my part of the department? How do I do this? So it is very much at the heart of what we're doing. And we also see this as a real key way of increasing employee engagement, which again is one of the key objectives we have for next year. So putting that sort of broader context of why we do this, let me talk a bit more about the actual example that you have got in the report. And this is very much an example around the outreach activity that we do. And from our tax credits part of the department, we've done a lot of work around the broader corporate responsibility agenda and have really been one of our pioneer areas and actually looking how do you get this into everyday activity within the department. And one of the areas that they did was to actually look and say, what we need to do is to try and understand how we promote take-up of tax credits, how we understand why we don't get as much take-up as we should. How do we get out there to understand what the issues are? Part of that was to actually do some real mapping activity, to actually say, where do we see that we have lowest take-up, and where does that map across? And interestingly, that did very much map into areas of deprivation. And in particular, they decided to do as a pilot to go to Birmingham, where they'd identified 2 or 3 wards where there seemed to be particularly low take-up. And what they did was to actually go out with staff volunteers over a 4-day period to different wards in Birmingham, these specific ones that they'd identified, go into places to meet the community, go into supermarkets, go into community areas, go into childcare centres, etc., and talk to people and get to understand why it was people perhaps didn't actually know that they were able to claim, what the issues were, and actually to try and really learn from that and bring that experience back into the department. One of the key things that we have here is this being what we would say, it's got to be a win-win-win. There's got to be a win for the individual, our member of staff that goes out there. There's got to be a win for the community, so it's seen as a valuable piece of work that we're doing. Again, this whole piece about good use of taxpayers' money, and it's got to be a win for the department. And I think this particular example does very much show a win-win-win in that way. The win for the individuals was very much that they came back, had great satisfaction of actually meeting people, understanding what they needed to do, getting that understanding about actually they made a difference to people in terms of getting it right when they were able to pay out tax credits correctly, but also understanding why it was that people found it difficult sometimes to make those claims. The other piece we were able to do as well is to really value our employees. And one example is that because going to Birmingham, there was a need to actually have some different language skills that we could use. And we were able to use volunteers from within tax credits who had the language skills that we needed to actually go and be able to get to talk to all the members of the community. So really valuing what they had and shared with us and brought to our department. The win for the community, it was actually to have a greater understanding how they made claims, to actually get a bit better feeling about what HMRC had to offer. And also this whole piece about it not being seen as so remote and actually really getting a feel about how they could actually get to the credits that they were due and how they could make those claims. And then finally, a win in terms of the whole department. There was a piece about improving our reputation. There was this piece about being seen that we weren't just this stuffy department, that we actually not only took tax, but we actually gave up benefits as well. that actually our people were really keen to be engaged with our customers and to understand them, and wanted to know the better ways to actually get to them. And there was real learnings there as well about practical things, about how well did some of our advertising work. Why was it we weren't reaching certain groups? What else could we do? And as a result of those 4 days of activity, when I think they spoke to over 1,300 different customers, there was also from that built other parts of the community that said, we'd like to continue this involvement. We think this is really valuable. So enabling us to feed back into the broader change programme going on around our tax credits area as an example. So the feedback was good on all counts. And I think there is actually a quote in the report, which I think sums it up from one of the people that went out there, that said, you know, it was great to give HMRC a face, to let people know that we do other things apart from tax people, that we actually do give money out, and to help me to really understand how I benefit people in what I do, which I think really does sum out the real business case and reality of why we should continue to do more and more of this activity. And our aim is to build on that experience, to build on the outreach as part, as I say, of this broader community initiative that we have. Thank you.
Judy, thank you. And I do think that story is so powerful, and the fact that things really did change. Right, so now let me go on to Jan. Jan Jones is here from DWP, and Jan tells me on the other side of that story, she has in her career paid out just about all the benefits that DWP has to offer. Since then, she's moved into HR. See, I'm going to prove to you that actually HR is very good about this stuff. And has worked on many different programs, but is now the program manager for Making a Difference. Which is really one of the most interesting and innovative approaches to participation. So, Jan, over to you. Tell us about DWP.
Right. Hello, everybody. Yes, my title, Head of People, Insight and Engagement Programmes, which includes the Making a Difference programme, which is a major leadership and an engagement programme for the department, but actually includes what I'm going to focus on talking to you about today, which is Community 5000. And this is our employer-supported scheme that we have in place in the Department for Work and Pensions. We're now in our 3rd year of this. We're a big department. We've got lots and lots of people that work in the organisation. We spend lots and lots of money. And our customer base is basically from the cradle to the grave. So what we've got is a huge opportunity to make a direct impact with our community partners and charity organisations. We knew that from our staff feedback that people didn't feel connected with the work that they were doing and the customers that they served. And seeing as we're in the midst of a massive change programme for the department, which really looks and aims to put the customer at the centre of everything that we do, we felt that we had to do something to respond to that. And Community 5000 was a scheme that was born out of this insight work that we'd got and a response to it. It's available for all staff, from our most junior colleagues through to our most senior colleagues. We have a lot of senior colleagues, over 300 senior civil servants work in DWP, and many of them have taken the opportunity to take part in Community 5000. But it's not something that has to be done by individuals, it can be done by teams as well, and offers an opportunity for people to develop themselves, learning and development, but also to directly share their skills, hone their skills, but give something back to the organisation. And as the slide says, it aspires to allow 5,000 hours of work, skills and time with our linked organisations. I mentioned our customer base is broad. We don't have specific criteria that where people can undertake this volunteering work. We have a very tiny core team that does the coordination for everything. But all that we do ask is that what people are going to go and volunteer and do has some input and some payback and some benefit to their customer area. So that offers a huge range of opportunities for people. So how does it benefit DWP? It allows us directly to get closer to this vast customer base, policymakers and benefit delivery people. 3/4 of our staff work in what we sometimes term frontline work, and so therefore have lots and lots of opportunity to deliver services. But by undertaking Community 5000 placements, it really gets that direct link up, that literal face-to-face link up, and see it from the customer's perspective. One example of this, of how we've been able to benefit the customers, but has brought benefits to us as well, is one manager visited and worked with the Salvation Army for homeless people. And through actually experiencing what homeless people have to deal with day to day in dealing with us, they put into place adjusted processes so that it's much simpler now and more straightforward. So it's from seeing it from that customer's perspective and bringing it back into the organisation. For a long time, DWP has worked very actively on evidence-based policy making. We have a large range of analysts and social researchers that work in the organisation. Going out and doing Community 5000 placements builds on that social research, actually makes it alive, brings it back into the organisation again. And that can only be advantageous to DWP in really delivering services that better meet our customers' needs. We've talked about the learning and development opportunities. The department is absolutely committed to continuous development for people, and we spend lots and lots of money on training and learning each year. And as we've already heard, undertaking a Community 5000 placement can develop hard skills and softer skills as well. And our people have skills that they might not even use day to day in their work, but that it gives them an opportunity to shine and show their colleagues what else they're able to do. One example of this was a team of people undertook a community project and clearing some area for so that children could use it afterwards. And the person that took the lead in doing that work is somebody that isn't known to display leadership skills in his day-to-day work. He's actually quite negative a lot of the time about the organisation. But undertaking that placement, he took the lead in a very practical way, because although he doesn't show that every day, he's a hugely good organiser and hugely good at telling other people and showing other people how they could develop practical things. And that showed a whole different side of him, and he personally got a lot out of it from a learning perspective, but his colleagues did as well. The feedback that we get, because we ask people to give us feedback after they've completed placements, 73% of people report that they have a better understanding of DWP's contribution, and 81% report that they understand more their customer needs more directly. So bringing all of that back into DWP is hugely positive for us. How does it benefit our people? Well, lots of what I've talked about, it benefits the individuals as well, doesn't it? Gives them a much better understanding of a customer perspective. A lot of time, if you're in more junior roles, you just don't get the opportunity through your day-to-day work to bring something back in to influence how we undertake what we do. It also breaks down barriers and perceptions for people as well. It's very easy sitting in one side, especially in these most challenging of times for everybody, but for DWP services, for people to assume that they understand the customer side of things. But undertaking a Community 5000 placement often can allay fears. And we've had examples where people have not worked in what we sometimes term this frontline role, but completing a placement on an individual or a team level has made them want to undertake a job working directly with people. It's inspirational as well. We've got an organisation that's absolutely full of committed people. But sometimes, although we're taking on a lot of people at the moment, we have people that might be a little bit frayed around the edges, shall we say, and not necessarily as positive as they could be. And we've got wonderful examples where people have gone out and worked directly with a customer base, and it's really re-energised them and inspired them in what they're doing, and that they can see it makes a real difference. And then that part around employee engagement that Judy mentioned earlier. Our staff surveys at the moment, and we're working very hard to keep them there, our levels of employee engagement are on the up. That's not to say that we haven't got lots of room for improvement, but we've certainly moved a great deal in the time that Community 5000 has been running. And we have a lot of people that are interested in undertaking a Community 5000 experience, and we're absolutely committed to allowing them to do that in the time to come. And finally, benefiting the community. What we want to do is not necessarily have people undertake one-off placements or experiences. Some of our arranged placements have turned into ongoing activities. So we've got one area up in the northwest where they cleared an overgrown cemetery, and that's been turned into actually a community area for people. And that group of people that got together, and it wasn't just from one specific business area, it was arranged as a joint venture across the business. As I said, we're a large department. It's very easy for us to work very much within our own business areas, and we're always trying to break down those barriers and working the cross areas. And this exercise that we did with these groups of people together, they've continued to work with that community project and keep up all the work that they did to start with. Also, some of our resources that we've supplied have enabled some of our partner organisations to complete a lot more than they ever hoped they could do. And we also had stories where, working with particular individuals, we've absolutely inspired them and helped them with their own confidence, their own communication, and in a very practical way, so that they've been able to move forward with their own lives. Going forward, we're absolutely committed to keep Community 5000 going. As I said, keep it and widen it out. We talked around the challenges of resources for what we're doing, and we're looking to put more in, but work it across the businesses so that it's continuously refreshed and revised for people, so that they absolutely can see the benefits and the added value to the business. We've had great success. We're looking to keep building on that. Thank you.
Another excellent story of the department doing a lot of things. Particularly I like the combination of doing good things for the individual, getting individuals re-energised, getting them motivated, but also actually making sure it's really close to connections with these people. I think that's something that I can go to. So, great, thank you very much for sharing that with us. And we've got time now for questions, actually. So, who'd like to start? Right, in the front here. Is there a mic that you need to speak into, or do you just shout? I think you may just need to shout. It's a really mic back there.
I volunteered for myself outside of here. The problem I had was some of the barriers this engagement with things such as CRV checks. I've been told 2 CRV checks and enhanced and no matter what. If I want to do any volunteering outside, if I want to do any volunteering outside of the group I work with now, I need to go to process all over again. The longest time I've waited for CRV check is 18 months to complete an application. And that was very difficult. We have this book on our internet about working with vulnerable people. I was in sports coaching. I would love to go and say, yeah, I've got the skills to do that, but I can't because I need to CRV check and then respond back to that. There's very plans to invest that.
I don't know about plans to address it, but I have been raising this for the past 4 years. First, when I was chairing the Commission on the Future of Volunteering, And secondly, ever since I've started being the government's champion, and it's one of the things, and Sophie and I have spent a lot of time battling with this, where we have said, look, you know, if you want to get people to be enthusiastic, waiting forever for a CRB check is a very bad idea. There's also, I mean, it is clearly ridiculous that you can't take your CRB check from A to B to C. And, you know, I think that there is some thinking around that. And there's, you know, but with the independent safeguarding stuff that's coming up this autumn, it may get worse before it gets better. Just let me warn you of that. I will say no more. It's not my job anymore, not since June the 3rd. But it's ridiculous. But the real issue here is that actually quite a lot of people are being asked to get CRB checks who don't need them, and that gums up the system. And one of the things, and you know, Sophie and I spent a lot of time on this, when we were looking at volunteering in health and social care, quite a lot of hospitals particularly ask everybody who volunteers to get a CRB check, even if they're working in hospital radio where they never see a patient, vulnerable or otherwise. I mean, you ought to really CRB check the visitors then, oughtn't you? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And it's just, we have become, and this is a much bigger point, we have become so risk averse as a society. We think that if you put a system in, that will make people safe. It's rubbish. It's not true. Yeah. And the systems themselves get gummed up. Now, you can't, I mean, you can't as civil servants, I can't as the now former Prime Minister's champion say, let's get rid of it. But I do think we should be looking at it closely. And I also think we should be looking at where actually coming up positive on a CRB check is a positive advantage. If you are going to mentor young people who are going to get into trouble and at risk of getting into trouble and have already offended a few times, who do you actually want to mentor them? People who've already been through the criminal justice system. At the moment, guess what? They want to volunteer, they come up positive on a CRB check, and most organisations, there are some honourable exceptions, but most organisations say, oh, it's too difficult, can't cope with that. So you're completely right. Is something being done? I'm looking at Sarah, I'm looking at Sophie. We've tried, but I think it's going to be a while. Right. There's guidance on the website, but I don't think we've broken the back of it. Yeah. Address up there, talk to Sophie. She's going to take it forward, she'll sort it.
Okay, so that was one very important issue. Somewhere in this room, I suspect, there is somebody who works somewhere near this area, so please be influential. Right, we've got a question over here. Thank you, Martha.
I was just a bit confused by the HMRC example because I thought volunteering was about benefiting the community. Yeah. And the example seemed to be something that you should be doing corporately anyway. You should be going out telling people about what you do. And I can't see the practical benefit. If I'm in hospital, you're coming to tell me about tax benefits rather, than sitting and reading with me or going to the shop or doing something. I just can't see. It seems like you're dressing up something you should be doing corporately as volunteering when it's not really volunteering at all.
It's a controversial point. Over to Judy.
But I think one thing I was saying, this is like as a continuum of our community activity and involvement, and that's one end of it. I think, yes, you're absolutely right, as a standard thing that everybody should be out there and actually engaging with the communities, and we should be doing more about that. The reality is that we don't. And what we are doing is using people volunteering to go and do that, which isn't actually part of their everyday activity. But it is very much about getting out there and understanding what the issues are. Now, I mean, I think it's a way of using this community involvement to do that as part of a bigger programme. That's not what all we do at all, but it is part of it. But, I mean, we have other people that would go out and support people in terms of what they might need in other ways. But I think if you make it too much, well, we won't do that because we should be doing it anyway, and we don't do it. Surely we engage people who are prepared to get out in the community and do stuff and say, what different things can we do that are really important to make sure that this department delivers properly? And at the minute, we're not getting out there and getting all the people to actually claim the benefits they should. And that's a real issue, and we should be looking at ways to do that. So I think it is quite legitimate for us to have that in this bigger continuum of what we view as our volunteering approach. I know, Baroness, in your report, there's comments about that, wasn't there?
I think this is quite complicated. Clearly, people who work at HMRC ought to be telling the public what they do and how they can get benefits. But in truth, we are not normally, as taxpayers, going to be willing to pay for people to go out to talk in community centres, actually talk to people in very small groups. That's not part of what we normally do. And we'd probably say that's a hugely intensive use of our people and beyond what people really want to pay for, if you actually just look at it from a taxpayer's point of view. One of the things that's good about this, and I think one of the reasons that we were excited by it, is it does use people's knowledge and experience, and they go out into these organisations, small community groups, whatever it is, but then you take that, and you take that back, and that ought to engender a desire to do other things with those same communities. I think if it were just literally giving information and nothing else, it would be not far short of what people should be doing anyway. But it is more than that. And the other thing is the business about using language skills and using people's life experiences. I think that's hugely important. We don't normally, and I think it's something actually I would criticise the civil service for. We're not good at saying, you know, what else have you got in your life experience that is valuable to the whole package? It's much more sort of regimented than that. I think the fact that people who speak different languages are using that language knowledge and skill and taking out the knowledge that they have about benefits to particular minority groups is hugely exciting, and that is volunteering, I think, in anybody's terminology.